She said it like it meant nothing. It's just for tonight. But the way she looked at me, tired eyes, trembling hands, a kind of silence that begged not to be alone, it didn't feel temporary at all. I didn't plan to let anyone stay. Not that night, not after the week I'd had. The apartment still smelled like rain and stale coffee. I was halfway through cleaning a mess that wasn't even physical, just the kind that lingers when you stop pretending life is fine. Then she knocked. 3 soft knocks. No text. No warning. Just her. I opened the door, and there she was, same gray hoodie she always wore, hair pulled into a careless knot, mascara smudged like she'd cried hours ago but refused to admit it. "Hey," she said, voice low. "Hey," I replied. She didn't ask to come in. She just looked past me into the room, the way people do when they're trying to see if your chaos matches theirs. After a long pause, she whispered, "Can I just stay here tonight?" I should have said no. We weren't anything, just 2 people who kept orbiting each other in that almost space between strangers and something else. But she looked at me like someone who'd run out of places to go. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Just for tonight." She smiled, a small, sad curve of her lips, and stepped inside. The door clicked shut, and the world felt quieter. She kicked off her shoes, sat cross-legged on the couch, and started picking at the loose thread on her sleeve. I made tea because it gave me something to do with my hands. We didn't talk for a while. The only sounds were the rain tapping against the window and the kettle whistling softly in the background. When I finally handed her the cup, she said, "You always make it too sweet. You always drink it anyway," I said. She smiled faintly. "Because it tastes like something trying too hard to be comforting. That's the point." That earned a quiet laugh, the kind that sounded like she hadn't done it in days. Then she looked at me, eyes soft but distant. "Do you ever just not want to go back?" "To what?" "To everything." I didn't answer right away. She didn't need me to. Silence said enough. We both knew what everything meant: people, promises, pain we tried to bury under new beginnings. She took a sip of tea, exhaled slowly, and whispered, "I told him I was fine." "Were you?" "No," she said simply. "But I got tired of proving it." The room went still. I didn't ask who him was. Didn't need to. There's a tone people use when they talk about the ones who broke them, calm, detached, but heavy enough to drown in. So I just said, "You can stay as long as you need." She shook her head. "It's just for tonight." But her voice cracked on the word tonight. Later, she fell asleep on the couch. I sat on the floor beside her, my back against the wall, pretending to scroll through my phone. The screen stayed dark. There was something about watching her sleep, not romantic, not yet, just human. The way her chest rose and fell, the quiet rhythm of someone finally resting after holding everything together too long. A strand of hair fell across her face. I wanted to move it but didn't. Touching her would have made it real. So I just sat there until my neck hurt and the rain stopped. Around 3 a.m. she stirred, mumbling something I couldn't make out. Then, half asleep, she reached out, fingers brushing the edge of my sleeve, and didn't let go. I froze. It was such a small thing, but it hit harder than I expected. Because for the first time in months, someone reached out toward me, not to take, not to demand, just to stay connected. Her hand stayed there until morning. When she woke up, sunlight spilled across the room. Her hair was a mess, her eyes puffy, but she smiled, small, sleepy, real. "Morning," I said. She blinked, looked around, and said, "You didn't go to bed?" I shrugged. "Didn't want to move." Something flickered in her expression, something almost like gratitude. "You're weird," she said. "So are you. Guess that's why it works," she murmured. I didn't ask what it was. I didn't need to define it. Not yet. She stayed quiet for a bit, then asked, "Do you ever wish people came with expiration dates? So you'd know when to stop hoping?" "That would ruin the surprise," I said. She smiled at that, but her eyes didn't agree. By noon, she was still there. She'd said, "Just for tonight." But now she was barefoot in my kitchen, wearing one of my shirts, humming off-key while pouring more coffee. It should have felt strange. It didn't. It felt like something I hadn't realized I missed. Presence. She caught me watching her. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "You're staring. Just trying to remember this." "This?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "The sound of you humming, the smell of burnt toast, the way sunlight makes the dust dance." She laughed. "You're making this sound poetic. It's just breakfast. Maybe to you." She rolled her eyes but smiled. That soft, shy kind of smile that looks like someone remembering how to feel safe. And in that moment I knew tonight wouldn't be the last. When she finally left that evening, she stood by the door for a long time, hands buried in her hoodie pocket. "You'll be okay?" I asked. She nodded. "Yeah." Then after a pause she added, "Can I come by tomorrow?" I smiled. "I thought it was just for tonight." "It was," she said, eyes meeting mine. "But maybe I was wrong." And just like that, with a half smile and a quiet goodbye, she left. But even after the door closed, the room didn't feel empty. It felt like she was still there, in the scent of her tea, the dent in the couch, the warmth that hadn't faded yet. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't want to clean it away. She came back 2 days later. Not tomorrow, like she'd said, 2 whole days. Long enough for me to think she wouldn't. Long enough for me to almost convince myself I didn't care. It was late again when she knocked. Same rhythm, 3 soft taps. The kind that said I'm here, but only if it's still okay. When I opened the door, she stood there holding a half-empty paper bag and an apologetic smile. "I brought takeout," she said. "In case you haven't eaten." "I haven't," I admitted. "Good," she said, walking in like she'd never left. "Then I'm not late." Her hair was damp from the rain. Her hoodie was new this time, faded green instead of gray, but her eyes looked the same, tired but lighter. She dropped the bag on the table and started unpacking without waiting for an invitation. "Don't get used to this," she said. "It's just dinner." "Sure," I said. She glanced at me and caught the smile I was trying to hide. "What?" "Nothing. Just déjà vu." She smirked. "Maybe we're stuck in a loop. Could be worse places to be." She laughed under her breath, and the sound filled the room again like it never left. Dinner was messy, cartons of noodles sauce spilled, her teasing me for not owning proper plates. We ate with chopsticks and talked about everything that didn't matter, bad TV shows, old songs, how she used to draw on her walls when she was a kid. But between the laughter there were pauses, those quiet little moments that hummed with something neither of us was ready to name. After a while, she leaned back, studying me with that same curious look. "You always listen too closely," she said. "Is that a bad thing?" "It's unsettling," she admitted. "Like you're not just hearing what I say, you're trying to catch what I don't." "Maybe I am." She smiled faintly. "You really shouldn't." "Why not?" "Because if you look too hard," she said softly, "you might actually see me." "I already do." She looked away at that, eyes flicking toward the window, fingers drumming nervously on the table. The rain outside had started again, soft and steady. "Every time it rains," she said, "I end up somewhere I didn't plan to be. Maybe that's not a bad thing. It is when you start wanting to stay." I didn't answer. Didn't have to. The silence between us said everything we weren't ready to admit. Later, she found an old record I'd forgotten I had, scratched, half-warped, but still playable. "Let's see if this thing works," she said, dropping the needle. The speakers crackled, and an old jazz tune filled the apartment. Low. Warm. Imperfect. She smiled. "That's better." Then, without asking, she reached out her hand. "Come on." "I don't dance," I said. "Neither do I," she replied. "That's the point." Her fingers brushed mine, light at first, uncertain, then firmer. She pulled me up, closer than I expected, and before I could think of a reason to stop, we were swaying. Not dancing, exactly. Just moving to a rhythm that belonged more to the moment than the music. The light was low, the rain whispering against the glass. She smelled faintly of jasmine and coffee. Her eyes met mine, tired, searching, a little scared. "See?" she said quietly. "Not so bad." "Not bad at all," I whispered back. We didn't speak after that. Just moved, slow, steady, almost like breathing together. And when the song ended, neither of us reached for the needle. We just stood there in the silence that followed, still close enough to feel each other's heartbeat. Then she stepped back, eyes down, smile faint but real. "You make it too easy to forget I'm supposed to leave." "Then don't," I said. Her expression changed, a flicker of something, a softness she didn't know how to hide. She turned away. "You don't get it. People like me don't stay. We break things. Maybe I'm okay with broken." She laughed quietly, not because it was funny, but because it scared her. "You shouldn't be. Maybe I don't have a choice anymore." That made her look at me, really look, and for the first time, there wasn't distance in her eyes. There was ache. Familiar, honest, human. She didn't say anything else. Just sat back down, legs tucked under her, staring at the rain. I joined her, and we stayed like that, shoulder to shoulder, quiet, watching the city blur behind the glass. At one point, she whispered, "You ever notice how the quiet feels different when someone else is in it?" "Yeah," I said. "It feels like breathing again." She stayed the night. No promises. No reasons. Just a quiet understanding. She fell asleep with her head against my shoulder, her hand resting lightly on my arm. Outside, the rain slowed. The record kept spinning even after the music faded. And somewhere between the sound of her breathing and the hum of the city, I realized this wasn't temporary anymore. She'd said it's just for tonight. But nights have a way of turning into something else when you stop counting them. The next morning, I woke up first. The sunlight hit her face just right, turning her hair into gold strands against the gray pillow. For a long time, I just watched her, not out of longing, but gratitude. The kind you feel when someone finally lets you see them without walls. When she opened her eyes, she caught me. "You're staring again." "Old habit," I said. "Dangerous one. Only if you plan on leaving again." She smiled sleepily. "Maybe I will. Maybe you won't." She didn't answer. Just reached for my coffee mug, took a sip, and said, "It's cold. I made it 2 hours ago." "Then make another one." "Bossy." "Comfortable," she corrected. I laughed quietly, and something in her expression softened, like the word comfortable had surprised her too. By afternoon, she was sitting on the floor with her sketchbook open, drawing aimlessly. I leaned against the doorway, watching her. "What are you drawing?" "Nothing," she said. "Just trying to remember what peace looks like." "Does it help?" She looked up at me, smiling faintly. "A little." Then she added, almost to herself, "It's strange. I didn't mean to find peace here. You can stay as long as you need." She met my eyes. "You keep saying that." "Because I mean it." She nodded slowly, then looked back down at her sketch. Her pencil moved in soft, unsure strokes. When she turned it around to show me, I froze. It was a rough sketch of 2 cups on a table, one empty, one half full, and a window behind them streaked with rain. "It's us," she said simply. "Us?" "Yeah," she said. "Incomplete. But still, something." Her voice trembled on that last word, and for a second I saw it, the part of her that wanted to believe, temporary, could last. That night, she didn't bother saying it was just for tonight. She just stayed. And I didn't ask why. Because some questions don't need answers, only time. He didn't see her the next morning. Not in the kitchen, not in the living room, not by the window where she usually sat watching the street wake up. For a few seconds that old fear returned, the one that whispered she's gone. Then he saw her shoes by the door. her coffee mug still half full on the counter, and her voice soft and low from the balcony. "You make terrible coffee." She was standing barefoot in one of his shirts, hair tied messily, the early light curling around her. She didn't look at him right away. She was staring at something beyond the city, like she was trying to make sense of how she got there. He leaned on the doorframe, smiling faintly. "I didn't think you'd still be here." She didn't turn around. "Neither did I." He walked out to her, slow steps on the wooden floor, the distance between them shrinking but not gone. "Then why are you?" She exhaled, watching the wind pull at her hair. "Because leaving felt harder than staying." There was silence, not heavy, just full. She turned finally, meeting his eyes. "I told you it was just for tonight." He nodded. "Yeah. You also said you don't stay anywhere twice." Her lips curved, tired but real. "Maybe I lied." He laughed quietly. "I'm fine with that." She looked at him for a long second, the kind of look that comes after a night where nothing physical happened but everything emotional did. Then she stepped closer, not enough to touch, just enough to feel the warmth between them. "You should probably stop looking at me like that," she said. "Like what?" "Like you're waiting for me to change my mind." He smiled, that slow, knowing smile. "Aren't you?" She almost said no. Almost. But the truth lingered too close to the surface, and she didn't trust her voice not to betray her. So she just walked back inside, brushing past him. He stood there, still watching her, the woman who swore she didn't stay, who laughed at the idea of permanence, who made even silence feel alive. That evening, she cooked for the first time. Or tried to. He leaned against the counter, watching her curse at the stove. "You're supposed to turn it on first," he teased. She glared, pointing the spatula at him. "Don't start." He grinned. "Too late." She threw a towel at him, laughing, a sound so unguarded it startled even her. The towel hit his chest and dropped to the floor, and for a moment, they just looked at each other. Something unspoken filled the space, something that wasn't supposed to exist. He walked closer, slow enough to give her a chance to step away. She didn't. "You look different when you laugh," he said softly. "Don't get used to it," she replied, but her voice lacked its usual armor. "I already am." That made her look down, eyes flickering to the floor, to the faint shimmer of heat between them. The timer on the stove beeped, breaking the spell. She turned it off, muttering something about burnt pasta. He moved beside her, close enough that their arms brushed as he reached for the plate. The simple touch carried more weight than it should have, like both of them were testing the edge of something they weren't ready to name. When they finally sat down to eat, she said quietly, "You don't ask questions, do you? Not unless you want to answer them." Her fork paused midway. "And if I did? Then I'd listen." She stared at him, really stared, as if trying to decide whether that was safe. Then she said, "There was someone once. I stayed too long. And when I left, I promised myself I wouldn't again." He didn't interrupt. Didn't move. "I'm not good at being someone's reason to stay," she finished softly. He looked at her, his voice almost a whisper. "Maybe you don't have to be. Maybe you just have to be here." She didn't reply, but her hand stayed on the table, close enough that when his fingers brushed hers, she didn't pull away. The night stretched long after dinner. They talked in pieces, about cities they missed, things they'd never said out loud, and the odd comfort of having someone who didn't demand to be fixed. By the time she fell asleep on the couch, head tilted toward him, he realized she hadn't once mentioned leaving. And when he finally carried her to the bed, careful, gentle, she stirred only enough to mumble, "Don't let the coffee burn again." He smiled in the dark, whispering, "I won't." He didn't. And neither, somehow, did she. The first rain of the season came a week later. It started soft, the kind that barely tapped the window, almost afraid to interrupt. She was sitting on the floor, sketchbook open, knees tucked under his old hoodie. The room smelled of coffee and petrichor, the faint hum of a song playing from the speaker. He watched her from the kitchen, silent. She had become a part of the place, her hair on his pillow, her laughter in the corners, her mug next to his on the shelf. And yet there was still something in her eyes when she thought he wasn't looking. A quiet distance. Like she was still packed somewhere inside. He walked over, leaning down beside her. You draw when you don't want to talk. She didn't look up. You talk when you don't want to feel. He smiled faintly. So we're even. For a while, they sat in silence, the rain filling the space between their words. What are you drawing? He asked softly. She turned the page toward him. A simple sketch, the balcony, the coffee mugs, two blurred silhouettes sitting too close. It's us, she said. Kind of. He nodded, studying the lines. You didn't draw faces. Because I don't know how long they'll stay. The words hit harder than they should have. He looked at her, really looked. The fragile calm, the way she built a wall out of small jokes and half-smiles. He said quietly, You don't have to keep reminding yourself to leave. She blinked, caught off guard. I'm not. Yeah, he said, almost to himself. You are. She closed the sketchbook, hugging it to her chest. It's not that simple, you know. I know. He took a breath, steady and slow. But I also know that sometimes, the things we think are temporary, are the only things real enough to last. Her voice trembled, barely audible. What if I break it? Then we fix it. Together. The rain thickened outside, like the sky had been waiting for that line. She looked at him, eyes full of something between fear and longing, and for the first time, she didn't hide it. I don't know how to stay, she whispered. He reached out, fingers brushing her hand. Then just don't go. She stared at their hands, at how easily his warmth filled the spaces she'd kept cold for so long. And then, almost against her own rules, she leaned in. It wasn't dramatic. No music swelled. Just the sound of rain, and two hearts that finally stopped pretending they didn't want to be heard. When she pulled back, she laughed softly. This is so wrong. Probably, he said, smiling. But it feels right. She shook her head, half smiling, half breaking. You make it sound easy. He looked at her the way only someone who's been alone too long can. It doesn't have to be easy to be worth it. She pressed her forehead against his shoulder, closing her eyes. If I stay, I can't promise forever, he whispered. Then just promise tonight. She laughed, the same way she did that first night, except this time, there was no distance in it. By morning, the rain had stopped. The light came in soft, golden, touching everything it could reach. She woke up before him, eyes tracing the quiet chaos of his room, the clothes draped over the chair, the sketchbook open beside her. And then, on the table, she saw a note in his handwriting. You said it was just for tonight. But if you're still here when the coffee's ready, I'll take that as a maybe. She stood there, reading it twice. Then 3 times. When he finally walked in, sleepy, hair a mess, she was still holding the note. He hesitated, waiting for her to speak. She looked up, a small smile tugging at her lips. The coffee smells terrible. He laughed quietly, walking closer. I know. She set the note down, met his eyes, and said, almost like a confession, Guess I'm staying for breakfast. He grinned, slow and soft, the kind that made silence feel warm again. Outside, the morning unfolded, new, quiet, unpromised. And for once, neither of them felt the need to name what it was. It was enough that she was there. And he was still making coffee. And neither of them wanted to leave.